Randomness? It's a girl thing. Planning your entire future with a guy you've only spoken 3 words to? It's a girl thing. Online shopping problem? It's a girl thing. A full camera roll? It's a girl thing. Going to the bathroom together? It's a girl thing. You name it. It's a girl thing.
Hi and welcome back to the It's a Girl Thing podcast. It's me, Kate, and we're here for another day, another chit-chat, another U&D session. It's been a little while since we've been here all together, so welcome back if you've been here for a while. And if you're new to our little Girl Thing community, welcome. I'm Kate, an 18-year-old girl from New Zealand. I'm an only child. I grew up without a big sister or any really close girlfriends to navigate life with, so this space is really my place to do that, your place to do that, and for all of us to just know that there's so many other people out there like that who just need that extra support and that you are not alone in feeling that way. Firstly, I want to say thank you to everyone who's supported so far. I love each and every one of you, especially if you send me a message. That truly makes my day. And yeah, well, what do we got to say? If you haven't already, make sure you tell a friend about the show. Share the episode with them if you think it'll help them. And yeah, let's get straight into it. Quick little life update. Uni has been busy. I now only have 2 tests left, but I've essentially passed everything. So I don't actually need those to pass my academic year. But obviously I'm going to try and pass them anyway. What else? I have been going home to my hometown every weekend for the last couple of months, which has been so nice. I absolutely love going home to my parents and all my friends that are still left at home, so that's been great for me. I also have 2 new guest episodes coming up in the next couple of weeks. Hopefully we'll have one next week and then one either the week after or the week after that, so keep an eye out for those. One of them's a lovely girl from New Zealand and another one's just a hop over the ditch in Aussie, so I can't wait to share those with you. Today we're going to talk about grief, and I couldn't really decide what I wanted to talk about today, but then driving home from being back at home, I realised that this is something I know I've been struggling with, and I wanted to share what I've learned and the things that I'm continuing to learn and where I'm at in the hopes that it might make somebody else feel a little bit less alone. So if you didn't know, my grandma, who I was extremely close with, she passed away back in March of 2023, and she had dementia and it was quite bad, but she still remembered who we were for the most part. But everything else was a whole blur. And she had a health event and ended up in hospital. And funnily enough, it happened during my showcase dance recital week for my senior year. And so I had my mum show up to the theatre and while we were mid-rehearsal and be like, I need to talk to Caitlin. So I need to talk to Kate. And I'm like, oh, what's happened? And I think I actually, because for my mum to show up to rehearsal like that, either I'd done something really wrong or something had happened to somebody else. And so she took me out the back and I think I genuinely said, who died? And then she goes, oh, Grandma's in hospital. And from there, I got the opportunity to go and be with her. She was unconscious, she was sedated. And anyway, fast forward the next couple of days, we got to sit with her and visit, and I talked with her and I held her hand, even though I don't know if she knew I was there. And then they had to unfortunately make the decision because she deteriorated so quickly to pull the plug. I had my dress rehearsal that night, and it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon where they'd made the decision, so I chose not to stick around. I had the belief that I didn't think she didn't want me to see her like that, see her at that very last moment. I thought she would want me to remember her for the incredible grandma she was to me, and so I chose to do that. Plus, she was my biggest dance supporter there was. So I chose to, with my partner at the time, he drove me across to my dance rehearsal, which was 20 minutes across town. And I showed up, and one of the girls who'd heard about what happened, she was like, oh, I should cry. And I literally had to be like, I think it was one of those moments where you're so in shock and you're so not processing. But I made almost a joke about it. I was like, oh yeah, they're pulling the plug now. And I realised afterwards, I'm like, that was probably not the best thing to have said. But grief is different. Shock is different. And I was one of the leads. I was a senior in this dance showcase. So I had to do these things. I had like a little solo. I was in big group parts. And I loved to dance. Like, I would have forever regretted if I'd missed my senior dance showcase. So I had to, unfortunately, push aside my grief in that moment. Almost get over it. That sounds so bad. But I forced myself to just get over it for those couple of days. And then on show day, we had senior speeches, and I dedicated a little bit of my speech and my dance stuff to her. But apart from that, I wasn't letting myself feel it. And then because I feel like I turned an off switch, grief for me was so weird because I never let myself have the chance to feel it as it happened. I almost had I literally turned off a light switch and was like, nope, don't need to feel this, don't need to think about it, let's move on. And then obviously it was my dad's mum, and he was rightfully upset, and my mum was supporting him. And in my head, was not true, but in my head I felt that I had to keep it together. That even though no matter how extremely close I was with her, that I was not allowed to fall apart, because then my mum would have to deal with both Dad and I falling apart, and I didn't want to do that to her because she also loved my grandma too, so she will have also been hurt and upset. And then the funeral rolled round, and it was a beautiful funeral. It's the first funeral I've been to that I remember, and I actually spoke at her funeral. Something I wasn't sure I'd be able to do, but I got to share my favourite memories of her, and I loved every moment of that. Anyway, back to, let's talk broadly about grief then, because you've heard that. Anyway, I'll finish my story. Kate, stop going off on a tangent sideways and then coming back. I couldn't find my podcasting notebook and I couldn't find paper, so we're freestyling today. But when we had the funeral, it was only that night did it actually start to hit me, and that was like a week and a half after she passed, that I really started to hurt and realise that she was actually dead. And I have to say that to myself. I don't like using gone, passed away. I have to say dead, because even now sometimes I expect to show up and be there. Okay, so grief. Let's talk about it. Like I said, mine was I turned off an off switch, and then all of a sudden, weeks, when I think about it is, when somebody dies, everybody is so oh my goodness, I'm so sorry for your loss. What can we do? How can we support you? You know what I mean? And sorry, my brain went off. But everyone's like, how can we support you? School's like, here, have a few days off for bereavement. That's what you were entitled to. But in that time afterwards, I turned my off switch off, and I decided that I didn't want to be near my parents. My parents took days off, but I didn't want to be in a house or going to family things where everybody was so consumed by grief, because at that stage I didn't want to feel it. And I think it was because I knew that when I chose to feel it, or that when I started feeling it, it was going to hit me like a truck. And it did. And I'm going to be honest, for the first time in years, I've talked about wanting to go to therapy for a little while. Before that, I had thought about it. I was like, there's things I want to talk about and I need somebody to help work through some things, but I never actually did it. I was, I guess in my mind, too scared. But it was only when I started to feel that grief for the first time and feel guilty for things I didn't need to feel guilty for that I actually went to therapy. And the biggest thing I worked through, which is going to sound so silly, but I also know other people do this, whenever somebody leaves, I always have to say goodbye, I love you, or see you later, I love you. I've always got to tell the person that's leaving, I love you. If obviously this doesn't apply to people I've met once or family friends of people that I don't think, but family, my close friends, my friends, it's goodbye, I love you. And if I don't say I love you, then in my mind I'm like, something's going to happen and they're not going to have known. But that's so silly, right? They're obviously going to know that I love them because I tell them at other times. I just realised I've been waffling for a little while, so I apologise if I make so little sense, but this is so important to me that I want to talk about for my sake, for your sake, somebody else's out there's sake. Grief isn't linear. Some days it was way worse than others. And other days I was completely fine. That switch was off. And I always come back to this analogy a friend at the time gave me, which was, your grief is this giant big red button. And we all say don't push the big red button, but we're always going to push the big red button. It's always going to get pushed at some point. And when somebody first dies, or when something first occurs, because grief doesn't apply just to death, it can apply to breakups, friendship losses, so many things in life. If you lose something, you can grieve it. But you've got your big red button and it's in a tiny square box. Like there's imagine barely a centimetre or an inch, whatever measurements you want to use, on each side of the button. And you're a little ball bouncing your way through life in that box. And so you're going to hit that big red button a lot. So you're going to feel these overwhelming grieving emotions, whether that's anger, guilt, sadness, loss, whatever part of the grief that you feel, it's going to happen frequently. And as time goes on, your box expands a little bit. It gets a little bit bigger as life continues to grow and move on. And the grief never goes away. It's still that nice big red button in the middle, but you're going to whack it. Your little ball going through life, you're going to hit that button way less often. So it doesn't mean that you stop grieving a person, a situation, anything. It just means that grieving doesn't take up your whole life anymore. And funnily enough, my box went from big and it got a little bit smaller recently. And that's okay. Your box can get smaller, you can go backwards, especially when situations occur that specifically remind you of a person, whether it's their birthday, whether it's their date, the anniversary of their passing. But for me, my granddad has started seeing someone new and told our family about it and introduced her to our family. And I initially said I didn't want to meet her. And that was okay. My parents respected that decision because of how close I was to my grandma and where I'm at with my grief. And so I didn't go to the dinner my parents went to meet her, and that's great for me. And then we had somebody in my family's birthday dinner, and we went round and there was this lady in the living room of that person's house. And I just assumed she was a friend of my aunt and uncle's. And it was quite funny. Somebody was like, oh, have you guys met before? And I was like, oh, no. So she said hi, gave me a hug, as you do sometimes with friend people. And then later in the night, my mum arrives a little bit late from work, and she says to me so quietly, she goes, I'm really sorry. And I go, what? What do you mean you're sorry? She's like, I'm really sorry, I didn't know she'd be here. I'm like, what? Who? She's like, such and such, granddad's new. And I'm like, what? I was like, you're telling me I just, in my mind, hugged my grandma's replacement. And she was like, oh my gosh, you didn't realise. And I was like, no, I didn't. And I was like, oh, you should have told me that because now I'm going to go cry. And then unfortunately I did. I went outside and I had a whole grief. I call them episodes because it's like a whole breakdown. And I actually had to go home. I drove myself home. And that was okay. Unintentionally, I did what I didn't think I could do. And then I've been to 2 things with her since. I don't love that she's around, but I'm learning to accept it and realise that this is life now. And just because she's there, it doesn't mean that my grandma has been replaced. What else? What else is there to say about grief and my grief journey? Some days will be wonderful, and some days everything will remind you of the person or the situation. And whatever that may be is okay. Whatever feelings you have in your grief situation are normal. Because you know that whole thing, everyone's unique. Everyone's grief is going to be unique because we're all unique. It's like how everybody's sad in different ways. Not everybody experiences the same emotions. Not everyone gets excited over the same things. Grief is the same. And there goes the saying where it's like, to love is to have lost, or to have lost is to have loved, or something crazy along those lines. And essentially it's just saying that when you love people, when you love somebody or something so much and you lose it, you're going to grieve. It's gonna hurt, it's gonna cause pain. But if you didn't love that thing in the first place, that person, that situation, then for it to have gone, it wouldn't have hurt at all. So you've sometimes got to look at it as a blessing, to know that for the time that situation, that story, that person was in your life for, you got to love them. They got to love you. And even though it's over now, doesn't mean that that love was any less great or any less important. So I want you to remember that your grief is your journey. Nobody can tell you how fast to get over it. Nobody can tell you when to feel, how to feel, and how to grow. And it's important to tell people around you when you're still grieving. And my biggest thing was that I felt like I was the only one left grieving her. And then something happened and I found out really I wasn't. And some days I do still feel like I'm the only one who grieves her and thinks about her and does this. But then I'm like, if I feel like that, somebody else is going to feel like that. So it's okay to still grieve though. It's okay to still grieve it. Just take it one step at a time, one day at a time. Get to the top of the roller coaster. Realise that it's got to drop a little bit because there is always a top point. But I just want to say, I am so proud of you, wherever you're at, whether you've experienced grief here or whether you're listening to this, so that you know maybe some foreshadowing of what it may end up being like. But it's so important that you take care of yourself in that time, and it's always important that you take care of yourself. And you were put on this earth for a reason, and that reason was to love. And if you're grieving, you've done just that. So I am incredibly proud of you. I'm proud of you for loving. I'm proud of you for giving yourself to a situation or a person. And I am just so proud, and I'm so hopeful that even after the pain of grief and loss, that you continue to put yourself out there. Don't shut yourself away. I love you always, and you're always welcome here. I hope you join us next week for a new episode, or if you like a little bit of gossip, confessions, and all the things in between, check out Coco Confessions on Wednesdays. And yeah, don't forget, if you know somebody who has lost somebody or might be grieving, share this episode with them, see if it helps, or listen to it and all the way through hopefully, and see if it helps you understand what they're going through. But yeah, I love you, and we'll see you next week. Bye my lovelies.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode. It's been great having you. If you have any topics you'd love for me to discuss, want some big sisterly advice, or just want to say hey, just reach out to me on Instagram at It's a Girl Thing Pod, and I hope you join us next week. Stay beautiful.